Hey guys, tonight we're taking a stroll down the plush, perfumed, and faintly ridiculous corridors of Second Empire France. A place where mustaches were waxed, dresses could knock over a side table, and the fate of Europe sometimes depended on the mood of a small, theatrical emperor and his even more dazzling wife. Yes, tonight you're going to find out what life was really like being the wife of Napoleon III. Spoiler, it involved less champagne and more existential dread than you'd expect. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Dim those lights, fire up the fan for background noise, get comfortable, and try not to worry about the 19th century bedbugs. They're only here for history. Let's get you thinking. Have you ever wondered if you could handle life in a palace where your every move is judged by 400 people in feathered hats? Do you think you could wear a corset tighter than your deadlines? Would you survive a royal dinner with 12 forks, one emperor, and absolutely zero privacy? Could you handle the existential horror of having to look regal while your husband starts a war by accident again? Or, most importantly, could you drink enough champagne to make polite conversation with diplomats who smell like cheese and ambition? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in Paris, 1853. Your bed is enormous, your hair is even bigger, and someone's already waiting outside your door to tell you how to smile. Good luck. You awaken to a room the size of a small gymnasium, sunlight struggling past the world's most aggressive velvet drapes. Before you can even groan, a cluster of maids swarms in with hot chocolate, fresh linens, and the polite urgency of people who definitely know too much about your personal habits. There's no snooze button here, just a cheerful lady in waiting, reciting your schedule in a tone usually reserved for military operations. You try to sit up, but the bed is less mattress and more marshmallow pit. It's wide enough to lose a small horse in, stuffed with enough down to make 1,000 ducklings homeless, and just as you find your balance, a tiny dog, one of the palace's dozen official lap warmers, erupts from beneath the blankets, startled by your attempt at autonomy. He yaps, you yelp. The maids ignore both of you. It's clear this is just a regular Tuesday. A woman approaches with a tray. She addresses you as Majesty, but with the same energy your dentist uses before telling you the bad news. Hot chocolate is poured, thick enough to stand a spoon in, and you do your best to sip elegantly while someone else, whose entire job seems to be holding a napkin under your chin, hovers just in case of drips. You're not awake enough to remember your own name, but you're expected to look composed. This is the paradox of imperial living. The less energy you have, the more people are watching. Your morning begins with a report. The weather in Paris, damp. The mood of the emperor, variable, with a chance of drama. The latest gossip from Vienna, scandalous, but not as scandalous as Paris. And an update on the state of the imperial lilies, drooping, like your will to live before breakfast. The schedule is terrifying. 3 audiences, a musical rehearsal you forgot you agreed to, and of course the daily ordeal of being sewn into something with a waist smaller than your left wrist. As you gather your thoughts, still somewhere between sleep and existential crisis, someone pulls open the curtains with the sort of theatrical flourish normally reserved for magicians. Sunlight pours in, revealing not just the elaborate gold-leaf ceiling, but also a seamstress, already crouched in the corner, measuring and muttering about shoulder ratios and the threat of last year's sleeves. There is no privacy here, only the relentless, well-meaning efficiency of a royal morning. You'd like to take a moment for yourself, maybe read, or stare at the wall in peaceful silence. No chance. While you're still sitting there, someone appears with a delicate silver basin for your morning wash. A process so public it feels like an awkward group project. You are gently scrubbed, combed, and dusted with enough talcum powder to fog up the next 3 rooms. Apparently, cleanliness is next to godliness. or at least next to the ability to look tolerable for a 9 a.m. audience with someone named the Duke of Parma. Through it all, you're expected to make small talk. How did you sleep? Not well. Would you like the violet or the rose-scented soap? Both smell like rich and slightly haunted. Will you be wearing the diamond tiara or the one with the sapphires? Which one weighs less and matches your desire to disappear? The questions never stop, and every answer is an official declaration. Finally, as the clock strikes you really should have gotten up earlier, the room erupts into motion. Dresses are carried in, each bigger and heavier than the last, while your hair is sculpted into a structure that could withstand a siege. A small disaster, a maid sneezes, someone drops a tray, and a pearl rolls under the armoire, imperial chaos. But no one flinches. You realize you're less a person and more a living, breathing project. By the time you stand up, fully trussed, powdered, and primped, you're no longer sure where you end and the furniture begins. Your day as Empress has started, every muscle tense, every moment scheduled. You glance at the window, half dreaming of escape, but you know you'll do it all again tomorrow, with new malfunctions, new rituals, and exactly the same tiny dog. Welcome to morning in the palace. No snooze button. Just you, a kingdom, and a staff determined to make sure you never get bored or lonely for the rest of your life. You've survived your first 20 minutes of consciousness as the Empress. Congratulations. Now, it's time for what historians might call the most dangerous part of your day. Getting dressed. Forget your modern routine of yoga pants and a hoodie. Here, the art of dressing is less about self-expression and more about defying several basic laws of physics and at least 3 major organs. It starts innocently enough. A clean linen chemise, soft and cool against your skin, offered by a maid who looks like she's prepping for minor surgery. There's a moment, fleeting, fragile, where you feel almost human. Then, with the gravity of an executioner, another attendant steps forward, holding the true symbol of imperial power, the corset. Or, as you'll soon think of it, the medieval torture device redesigned for maximum French elegance. It takes a team, at least 3 people, sometimes 4 if the weather is humid or your waist has the audacity to exist. You stand, arms raised, as the boned, quilted, absolutely humorless garment is wrapped around you and cinched tight with the kind of determination usually reserved for climbing Everest. You've heard stories of fainting duchesses, dislocated ribs, and someone's cousin who allegedly sneezed too hard and burst a seam. The fear is real. With every tug of the laces, you lose another millimeter of circumference and a little bit of hope. Breathing, once so casual, becomes an advanced skill. You're told to exhale gently as the laces pull tighter, like you're inflating a hot air balloon but in reverse. Each inhale is a calculated risk. Will you manage a full breath or just produce a high-pitched squeak? The answer is almost always squeak. Corsetry is a science and an art. Your dresser is part engineer, part therapist, and part motivational speaker. Just a little tighter, Majesty. Think of your silhouette. She chirps, as if the only thing standing between you and total happiness is a spinal cord compressed to the thickness of a breadstick. You can't help but wonder how much of 19th century diplomacy was handled by women slowly asphyxiating at formal dinners. Layers follow. There's the petticoat, one, then another, and another. Each layer promises structure and poise, but really, it's just insurance against wardrobe failure and the constant threat of accidental transparency in the wrong kind of candlelight. By the time your skirt goes on, you're not so much dressed as armored. It takes up so much space you could host a diplomatic summit beneath it, and the Prussian ambassador would still have room to sulk. Bodice, sleeves, and collars come next, buttoned, hooked, and pinned with medieval precision. Each piece is embroidered, bedazzled, or otherwise engineered to remind you and everyone else, that you are, in fact, the Empress. At this point, you've stopped feeling your toes and started wondering if the entire idea of comfort is a conspiracy invented by the British. Let's not forget accessories. There's the matter of stockings, garters, gloves, fans, ribbons, jewelry, enough trimmings to make a Christmas tree jealous. A lady in waiting produces a cameo brooch with the same solemnity as a doctor delivering test results. It matches your eyes, your dress, and your barely contained sense of despair. As your hair is arranged, teased, braided, and shellacked into a sculpture that could survive minor artillery fire, you catch sight of yourself in the mirror. What you see isn't just a woman, it's a living, breathing monument to French fabric production. You smile because you must, but deep down you're calculating how long you could survive if you just made a break for the garden in your underclothes. And as a finishing touch, the shoes. Slippers so delicate you're not convinced they aren't made of spun sugar and broken promises. Someone kneels, slipping them onto your feet with a gentle warning. Don't actually walk anywhere. After all, movement is overrated. Finally, you're ready. Or, at least, you're encased, upright and technically mobile. The staff steps back to admire their work. You, the Empress, are now ready to face a new day. If only you could remember what your ribs used to feel like. Dressing, you realize, is not just about looking royal. It's about surviving, one gasp at a time. And somewhere, beneath all those layers, a very small part of you is still plotting revenge against whoever invented whalebone. Onward to breakfast, assuming you can fit through the door. You've survived the morning marathon of dressing, corseting, and being trussed up like a holiday roast. Congratulations, you now qualify for breakfast, a meal that, in theory, should be simple. In practice? Not so much. Here, breakfast is less a way to start the day, and more of an opening act to the never-ending play called Imperial Expectations. You're ushered into a dining room so large and echoing that every cough bounces back at you twice. The table is a mile long, draped in more white linen than a small hospital, and set with enough silverware to repel a small army. The place settings are so precise they might have been measured by astronomers. You, of course, sit at the head, an island of anticipation surrounded by a sea of polite, hungry faces. Your first test. Remembering who everyone is. There's your chief lady-in-waiting, who's been awake since dawn and looks like she's already judging your posture. There's the minister of something important, pretending not to eavesdrop, and your cousin, yes, that cousin. The one who always asks awkward questions about the budget in front of guests. Every seat is occupied by someone who wants something, knows something, or, in at least one case, just likes free pastries. A footman presents the menu, printed on a card thick enough to double as body armor. Choices include eggs prepared 4 different ways, an assortment of breads, cheeses, fruit from somewhere that sounds expensive, and, of course, croissants, layers of butter, flour, and national pride. There's also hot chocolate so thick you can barely convince it to leave the cup, and enough coffee to keep the entire foreign ministry awake through the Prussian question. Here's the thing. Breakfast is not private. As Empress, your morning meal is public performance. Equal parts, nutrition and theatre. Every bite is observed, every sip catalogued. Eating too little suggests you're ill. Eating too much hints at a possible scandal. The tabloids already think you have a secret fondness for pastries. Your choice of jam could, theoretically, spark a minor diplomatic incident if the wrong ambassador is watching. Peach? Spanish? Raspberry? Risky? That's Prussian territory. And then there's the endless, never quite sincere conversation. Small talk is weaponized at this level. Courtiers deploy gossip the way fencers use foils, with subtlety, wit, and the occasional direct hit. You're expected to nod, smile, and express the right amount of amusement or horror depending on the scandal of the day. Did you hear about the Hungarian countess? Someone whispers, eyes bright with glee. You nod thoughtfully, even though you're not sure if this is about a ball, a bankruptcy, or a runaway ostrich. The emperor occasionally sweeps in, trailing the scent of expensive cologne and slightly frayed nerves. His arrival sparks a brief flurry of standing and bowing, followed by a tense silence as everyone wonders if he's in one of his let's invade something moods. You exchange pleasantries, carefully steering the conversation away from politics and toward topics that don't require immediate troop mobilization. Food is served in courses, each more elaborate than the last. There's the soft-boiled egg ceremony, performed with such gravity you'd think it was a coronation, and a procession of pastries that require their own parade license. You try to eat daintily, but the layers of crinoline and whalebone make reaching the table a minor athletic event. You finally manage a bite of croissant, only to discover it's filled with apricot and existential dread. As you sip your chocolate, you sense an undercurrent of panic from the kitchen. There's a muffled crash, followed by a string of muttered French that is definitely not in the official etiquette handbook. Somewhere in the palace, a chef is probably having a crisis over the exact temperature of your butter. Eventually, the meal winds down. There are polite murmurs, delicate dabbing of lips, and a final round of coffee before you rise. Another performance completed, another round of rumors started, and your digestive system left to contemplate the risks of mixing politics, pastry, and a room full of professional eavesdroppers. And as you glide out, chin high, you remember, breakfast is never just breakfast when you're Empress. It's a contact sport. You step out of the dining room, full of croissants and conversational battle scars, and are instantly swallowed by the humming organism that is your household staff. It's easy to forget that being Empress isn't just about looking good under a chandelier. It's about managing a workforce the size of a small village, all of whom appear to be moving in opposite directions at once, carrying silver trays, bouquets, confidential letters, and at least one extremely agitated parrot. Your staff is legion. There are butlers, valets, footmen, grooms, cooks, pastry chefs, undercooks, overcooks, kitchen boys, and kitchen boys in training, whose job appears to be standing in the way. There are laundresses, maids of all ranks, sewing mistresses, and an entire department dedicated solely to starching napkins and finding your misplaced gloves. Some days you suspect there's also a professional goose wrangler, just in case the gardens get too lively. Each one has a uniform so crisp and color-coordinated that if you ever lose track of who does what, you just have to count the buttons and guess based on the level of panic in their eyes. The hierarchy is labyrinthine. The chain of command makes the army look relaxed. At the top sits the chief steward, a man so unflappable he could host a dinner for 3 rival monarchs while reciting the names of every single wine glass in the palace. Somewhere near the bottom is a boy whose sole function is to carry messages from the kitchens to the second-best butler. He is 12 and already more dignified than you on your best day. There's an entire wing devoted to cleaning. Teams with mops, brooms, and secret recipes for removing candle wax from priceless carpets. If a single cobweb is spotted, there is an inquest, and if a mouse is caught, there is a parade for the cat, not the mouse. Each morning, your rooms are aired, dusted, swept, fluffed, and inspected until you're not sure if you're a resident or a rather glamorous museum exhibit. The kitchen is its own universe, ruled by a chef with a temper as sharp as his knives. Meals must be timed to the second. A soufflé that deflates before reaching the Empress's mouth could mean weeks of kitchen drama, secret tears in the pantry, and a minor diplomatic incident if the sous chef happens to be related to the Swiss ambassador. You once tried to suggest breakfast at a slightly later hour and nearly triggered a pastry-based mutiny. All correspondence, meanwhile, is filtered through a small army of secretaries, each with beautiful handwriting and a suspiciously detailed knowledge of court intrigue. Letters are written, rewritten, edited for appropriate tone, and sometimes read aloud for your approval. You sign documents with the regal flourish of someone pretending not to worry about paper cuts. And then there is the parrot. A gift from some long-forgotten dignitary. It lives in the grand salon, perched on a gilded stand, and has learned to repeat only the most inconvenient words in Spanish. Nobody knows why it's always in a bad mood, but it seems to have a sixth sense for chaos. Whenever the palace is at its busiest, state dinner, royal visitors, tense moments with the emperor, the parrot launches into a tirade that can be heard from 3 rooms away. You'd return it. But the paperwork is worse than the squawking. Managing this many people means learning to delegate again, and then remind everyone not to take instructions from the parrot. You solve problems by raising an eyebrow, giving a tiny nod, or in extreme situations, deploying the Empress's meaningful silence. Sometimes, you wish for a bit less staff. Maybe just enough to fit around your breakfast table, or at least fewer people to witness you tripping over your own train. But in the end, you know every polished spoon, every scented sheet, every orchestrated moment of calm in the chaos is the work of 300 professionals, plus one very opinionated bird. Being Empress means managing a palace, a kingdom, and a never-ending parade of personalities. And if all else fails, at least you know who to blame when the parrot learns a new word. If you thought getting dressed was tough, just wait until you discover the full horrors of court fashion. Here, clothing isn't just a matter of taste or comfort. It's a contact sport. Fashion is both weapon and armor, a language of silent wars fought in silks and satins, and your wardrobe could fill a decent-sized cathedral. The downside? Every outfit is a potential health hazard, a walking conspiracy against your freedom of movement and your basic dignity. Let's start with the numbers. At last count, your closet contains 47 day dresses, 23 evening gowns, 16 ball gowns, 9 morning ensembles, and something labeled for yachting even though you get seasick in a bathtub. Each has its own undergarments, outer garments, side garments, seasonal accessories, and, inexplicably, a separate box for just the sleeves. A team of dressers maintains a daily spreadsheet just to track what you've worn in public. Because the Parisian tabloids have a memory like an elephant with a grudge. It's not just the volume, it's the architecture. Skirts are engineered with more scaffolding than most Parisian bridges. Layers of petticoats, crinolines, and the ever-present cage, metal hoops sewn discreetly, or not, into linen. Expand your dress into a tent big enough to shelter the entire Minister of Agriculture during a rainstorm. Walking through doorways becomes a calculated maneuver, involving angles, pivots, and a mental map of where all the palace statues are located. If you think that's dramatic, wait until you try to sit down. Chairs are not designed for empresses. They're narrow, wobbly, and never in the right spot. The moment you attempt to sit, there's a 60% chance you'll take a side table, a decorative urn, and possibly a small dog with you. If you manage to land upright, you'll find your skirts ballooning in all directions, your corset resisting any attempt at relaxation, and your jewelry providing helpful commentary by catching on every available surface. And then there are the fabrics. Court fashion demands silks that shimmer, satins that reflect candlelight, and lace so fine it disintegrates if you look at it too harshly. Everything itches, pinches, or rustles like a warning. Your dresses arrive in hat boxes the size of bathtubs and weigh as much as a healthy sheep. Each morning, a small committee meets to discuss color. Too much black and you're accused of melancholia. Too much yellow and you're rumored to be plotting with the Spanish. Accessories are their own beast. Gloves that button from fingertip to elbow, requiring at least 2 assistants and a prayer. Fans that are more expensive than your first pony. Shoes so delicate you could injure yourself just by walking too confidently. And hats. Oh, the hats. Some are so enormous they cast shade on half the breakfast table. Others are covered in plumes, netting, or entire miniature gardens. You once wore a bonnet so heavy you needed to rest your neck for 3 days afterward. Fashion here isn't just about being seen, it's about sending messages. A misplaced ribbon can signal a brewing diplomatic crisis. Wearing last year's embroidery is social suicide. You once caused a minor scandal by wearing a shawl with a controversial paisley, sparking a 3-week debate among the court's amateur art historians. Even your hair is politicized. Up for solemnity, down for romance. Adorned with enough jewels to make your neck reconsider its commitment to the job. Of course, all these layers and rules come with a price. You live in constant fear of wardrobe malfunctions. A snapped hoop, a fallen petticoat, a ribbon gone rogue. Once, during a state dinner, your gown's train caught on a diplomat's spur, nearly dragging him under the dessert cart. You both survived, but the incident made the rounds in Vienna and gained you a reputation for dynamic entrances. In the end, dressing for court is an art form, an endurance challenge, and a daily risk assessment. It's not about comfort. It's about survival. And if you make it through a single day without knocking over a vase, you deserve a medal, preferably one that matches your hat. You have officially made it through breakfast, an obstacle course of etiquette and eavesdropping, and managed to dress yourself without starting an international incident with your petticoat. That should entitle you to a moment of peace. Alas, peace is not on the schedule. Your day as Empress is a parade, and you are the main float. The first event, the morning promenade. Promenade is a French word meaning smile at 100 people while pretending you can't see anyone's eyebrows. You step into the grand hallway where servants are lined up like dominoes, ready to curtsy, bow, and watch you pass with the solemnity of marble statues. Some have been up since 4 in the morning just to stand perfectly still while you walk by. It's like being in a live-action version of a very judgmental painting. As you glide past, you feel the weight of 1,000 eyes. There are the palace staff, whose livelihoods depend on not dropping a single tray in your presence. There are assorted courtiers, each mentally calculating how many bows is too many, and whether you'll notice their new cravat. But that's just the warm-up. The real challenge comes when you enter public view, the grand staircase. A marvel of French architecture, designed to inspire awe and prevent anyone from leaving in a hurry. It also functions as a theatre box for visitors and Parisians alike. Today, a diplomatic party from Belgium, 3 duchesses, 2 American journalists, and an entire school of children are here to catch a glimpse of the legendary Empress. For them, this is the highlight of their year. For you, it's Tuesday. You descend, smiling with all the serenity of a woman who has definitely never tripped on her own hem. There are rules to this smile. Too wide and you look deranged, too faint and you'll be accused of snobbery in next week's Gazette. You have practiced the ideal smile in front of mirrors, on long carriage rides, and once, very awkwardly, in front of the Emperor's hunting dogs. None of them ever smiled back. Outside the palace, the crowds are even bigger. Parisian life is obsessed with spectacle, and nothing is more spectacular than the Empress herself. You are met by a sea of hats, waving handkerchiefs, and people holding up their children, presumably so they can say, "Look, that's what stress looks like at close range." There's always a cluster of caricaturists sketching your every blink, and the resulting drawings will circulate in the city's cafes before you even get home. You nod at the crowd. You wave, slowly, regally, as if you are distributing invisible blessings, and not just desperately trying to keep your glove from slipping off. Every movement is analyzed, every facial expression is interpreted. If you pause, you're reflective. If you hurry, you're cold. If you sneeze, you are instantly rumored to be dying. Once, you coughed during a garden party, and the papers speculated about a royal funeral by sunset. Being in the public gaze means you are never allowed to have a truly private moment. Even your so-called quiet walks in the garden are interrupted by strategically placed admirers, groundskeepers who seem to be everywhere, and the occasional hidden journalist hoping for a glimpse of royal scandal or at least a dropped hairpin. Privacy is a myth, a fairy tale for people who aren't photographed while eating pears. You are watched while entering carriages, leaving salons, feeding birds, and sneaking a yawn behind your fan. Even your shoes are scrutinized by people who have never owned socks. If you try to escape, someone will always notice, and the rumor mill will be off to the races. And so, you keep smiling, for the crowds, the diplomats, the endless swirl of society. Every smile is a shield. Every nod a tiny performance. Every moment in public, another scene in a royal play that never seems to end. At the end of the day, you wonder if your face will ever relax. You're not sure, but you do know you've given your best performance, one smile at a time. The real education of an empress doesn't come from books or ballrooms. It comes from the ceaseless, terrifying gauntlet of etiquette. Your schedule may be filled with official meetings and grand receptions. But let's be honest. Most of your day is spent dodging social disasters with the agility of a ballet dancer who's just realized the stage is made of ice. It begins before you even leave your rooms. There's a short lesson from your etiquette tutor. A woman so formidable she could shush a cavalry regiment with a single raised eyebrow. Today's topic, the appropriate number of curtsies per minute. You nod, desperately trying to remember whether the three-part bow is for archbishops or just minor princes, and praying you don't accidentally invent a new one in front of the entire Austrian delegation. Dressing is, once again, fraught. The shade of your gloves communicates more than an actual letter. Pale blue means serene. Lavender says you're in mourning. For what? You're never sure. And a misplaced crimson sash could get you a stern note from the British ambassador. Your fan is also loaded with hidden signals. Open and close it too fast, and you might accidentally invite someone to a duel. Flick it just right, and you're rumored to be considering a secret elopement. Who writes these rules? Nobody knows, but breaking one is basically a felony. Breakfast is its own obstacle course, but once you're out in public, the real etiquette Olympics begin. First, the greeting. There are bows for men, curtsies for women, handshakes for very close friends, and air kisses for the handful of people who aren't actively plotting your social downfall. One wrong move, and you're either hopelessly informal or a dangerous radical. You once forgot to address a duke as Your Serene Highness, and the resulting fallout lasted 2 weeks, 4 strongly worded letters, and a minor opera. Conversation is where things get truly dicey. Every word must be filtered, fluffed, and ironed before release. Accepting compliments is a masterclass in modesty. Too gracious and you seem vain. Too humble, and they'll think you have something to hide. If a duchess mentions her garden, you must admire her roses, even if last season's frost left them looking like boiled turnips. Every anecdote is fraught with danger. You don't want to overshadow anyone, but God help you if you seem dull. Then there are titles. Everyone has one, and half of them are made up for the occasion. Baron de la Fromagerie turns out to be a cheese merchant who married up. Countess von Noodle Pudding is only a countess if you squint at her family tree and ignore 2 generations of scandal. But you must remember every title, every prefix, and every obscure cousin. Getting it wrong can start a feud that lasts generations. Dining etiquette could fill its own encyclopedia. There are more forks than there are days in the week. Pick the wrong one, and you'll be the subject of courtly gossip before you can say asparagus. Napkin placement is a diplomatic act. Use the wrong bread plate and you might just spark a war with Sardinia. One night you dropped a spoon and 3 ladies fainted. You still wake up sweating about it. Even the most innocent act, a stroll in the garden, a hand rested on a marble banister, can be fraught. Are you walking with the correct person at your side? Are you ahead of the right duchess, but behind the wrong marquis? Are you standing on the spot where the Queen of Spain once stubbed her toe? That's a faux pas. Only time can heal. At the end of every social marathon, you return to your chambers, head spinning with protocols. You survived another day. No accidental marriages, no new duels, no treaties signed by mistake. Being Empress means walking a tightrope over a pit of etiquette alligators, never knowing which obscure rule might snap its jaws next. But you keep going, one perfectly timed curtsy at a time, and hope tomorrow's lesson isn't advanced protocol. Smiling without showing your teeth. Just when you think you've conquered the labyrinth of etiquette and survived another parade of curtsies, you remember, your real challenge is waiting at home. The imperial family, those mysterious figures who share your bloodline, your monogrammed handkerchiefs, and, unfortunately, your address, are the final, unsolvable riddle of palace life. Courtiers you can outwit, foreign diplomats you can flatter, but family? There's no escaping the relatives. At first glance, it seems glamorous. Who wouldn't want siblings with their own titles, uncles who govern provinces, and a cousin whose wedding cake needed its own scaffolding? But beneath the diamonds and ancestral portraits, the family is an unpredictable zoo. Each member has a hobby, an agenda, or, on a bad day, a vendetta. There's the emperor, of course, who you married for love, or strategy, or possibly by accident at a diplomatic picnic. He oscillates between affectionate, distracted, and plotting a surprise invasion of Belgium again. Some mornings he's cheerful, playing with the royal poodles and reminiscing about his childhood. Other days, he is hunched over maps, muttering about Prussia and asking if you've seen his lucky hat. Your job: keep him entertained, keep him calm, and try to hide any sharp objects during diplomatic crises. Then there's your mother-in-law. She is the unofficial minister of disapproval. Her hobbies include rearranging the drawing room, criticizing modern music, and holding court in the garden with a circle of equally frosty dowagers. If you're not careful, you'll be trapped at her side for an hour-long lecture on the decline of standards since 1820, which always ends with a pointed glance at your hair. Your own side of the family is hardly less perilous. There's that uncle who insists on giving impromptu political advice after 2 glasses of wine, and the aunt who has not smiled since the Bourbon Restoration. There's the cousin with artistic tendencies, who once painted a portrait of you with an extra eyebrow, now displayed in the guest wing, haunting your dreams. Family dinners are a spectacle. The table stretches across the room, every place set with more silverware than seems strictly necessary. The conversation zigzags between diplomacy and personal grievances. The emperor's younger brother, technically a prince, but functionally a professional gambler, always tries to get a card game started before dessert. If you lose track of him, check under the table for dice and suspiciously stained playing cards. Don't forget the imperial children, the heir, the spare, and the third one whose name you can never quite remember. Raising royal offspring means balancing discipline, affection, and a small army of governesses. Every tantrum is a state event, every scraped knee a potential front-page scandal. Your daughter collects beetles in her jewelry box. Your son has taken up fencing indoors. Much to the terror of priceless vases and visiting dignitaries, extended family members pop in with alarming frequency. There's always a second cousin in need of a loan, or a baroness seeking a marriage match for her son, who unfortunately resembles a frightened badger. A minor duke arrives twice a year just to complain about the quality of the palace cheese. The family pets deserve a mention. There's the parrot who curses in Portuguese, the poodles who wear matching capes, and the cat who only answers to Marquis. Sometimes it's hard to tell where the blood relatives end and the animal kingdom begins. And of course, there are secrets. Old scandals buried under layers of velvet and polite silence. A sister-in-law whose letters you absolutely shouldn't read. A grandfather whose collection of antique pistols once mysteriously fired during a masquerade ball, nearly triggering a diplomatic incident with Sweden. Navigating the imperial family is less about love and more about survival. You cultivate alliances, avoid open warfare, and occasionally bribe your way out of embroidery circles. At the end of the day, you remember that titles, crowns, and castles don't change one simple fact. Family will always be family. And as you retreat to your rooms, you promise yourself that tomorrow you'll hide behind a potted plant at dinner, just for a little peace. You may have married into royalty, but no etiquette book or palace handbook could truly prepare you for the roller coaster that is life with Napoleon III. Some people collect stamps, some people collect regrets. Your husband, however, collects crises, political, personal, and occasionally culinary. From the moment you wake up, there's a non-zero chance that the emperor is about to do something either history-making or spectacularly ill-advised. You're never quite sure which it'll be until you see the expression on his face at breakfast. If he looks pleased, be afraid. If he looks distracted, be more afraid. Napoleon III in a good mood is the diplomatic equivalent of standing next to a fireworks display holding a barrel of gunpowder. He is, at heart, a romantic. That's what everyone says. A dreamer, whispers the court. A visionary, writes the press. A hazard to upholstery, mutters the cleaning staff. In his lighter moments, he's witty and charming, capable of reciting poetry in 3 languages, 2 of which he's only half learned. He brings you roses at the oddest hours and once commissioned a musical composition just to cheer you up after a difficult council meeting. Sometimes, in these gentle moods, you remember why you said yes, but then the mood turns, as it inevitably does. You never get a warning, just a sudden flurry of aids, the sound of boots pounding marble, and a strong whiff of cigar smoke. This means the emperor has read a newspaper, received a letter, or, worst of all, overheard a rumor about himself at the opera. Now, the palace is a beehive of anxiety, and you are promoted, instantly and without training, to chief soother and diffuser of imperial tantrums. He is convinced, on any given afternoon, that France is on the brink of either golden glory or total collapse, and that only his personal intervention, possibly involving cavalry, can tip the scales. He'll spend hours in the map room, shifting little lead soldiers across territories, mumbling about coalitions and alliances and the importance of Luxembourg. The staff tries to keep up, but honestly, nobody knows where Luxembourg is. Least of all, the emperor. If he's not waging war on Europe, he's waging it on the palace decor. Napoleon III has opinions about wallpaper, opinions about curtains, and an inexplicable vendetta against the parlor rug. Sometimes, when he's deep in thought, he'll move all the furniture into the hallway, mutter about flow, and then vanish, leaving you and 6 bewildered footmen to reverse engineer his vision. You suspect he'd redecorate the Tuileries in the middle of the night if he weren't afraid of waking the parrot. Political intrigue is the air he breathes. Your husband attracts conspiracies the way jam attracts wasps. There are always secret meetings, coded notes, and plots in the garden after dark. You've learned to listen for keywords, diplomatic urgency, treaty of mutual defense, absolutely not a coup, before deciding if you need to intervene or just offer him a sandwich. Of course, with great power comes great paperwork. You sometimes wonder if the real reason he goes to war is just to escape the mountain of petitions, letters, and official decrees waiting in his study. You find yourself signing things for him just so he'll eat dinner. You once authorized a shipment of 300 chamber pots to Nice, and neither of you will ever know why. Yet, for all his flaws, Napoleon III is fiercely loyal to those he loves. His affection is real. His intentions, however misguided, are almost always genuine. He cares about the people of France, the future of the empire, and, in his own dramatic way, about you. So you steady yourself each day for the next grand scheme, the next hasty military maneuver, or the next accidental fire in the royal kitchens. Life with Napoleon III isn't easy, but it's never, ever boring. And as you collapse into bed, exhausted by imperial drama, you can't help but wonder what tomorrow's headline will be. Because, with your husband, it's guaranteed to be interesting. For most people, the bedroom is a sanctuary, a refuge from the demands of the outside world. For you, Empress of France, the boudoir is less a haven and more a second, more comfortable council chamber. Here, amid silk pillows and damask curtains, history quietly unfolds in dressing gowns and whispered confidences, often with a hairbrush wielded as a makeshift scepter. It starts with the evening ritual. The palace slowly empties of diplomats and courtiers, the noise fading to a dull hum. But your own chambers fill up with new energy. Maids flit about, folding linens and laying out tomorrow's gowns. A secretary arrives with last-minute correspondence. Delivered with the gravity of a man who knows the real power in Paris is wielded from a featherbed. A footman brings tea and petites fours, one of which will inevitably be stolen by the imperial lapdog. Finally, the doors close, the staff bows out, and the real business begins. The emperor appears, already shedding the formal stiffness of state. Here, in the lamplight, he's a different man, less formidable, more fidgety. He sits on the edge of the bed, hands full of crumpled dispatches, face creased with the woes of an empire that never sleeps. This is the arena of pillow talk, where national policy rubs up against personal comfort. Here's the secret. In the palace, no room is truly private, but the bedroom comes closest. And in this fragile twilight, you have his ear like nowhere else. The state dinners, the ceremonies, the endless lines of dignitaries all fade away. What matters now are the small things. The rumors you heard at lunch, the worried glances exchanged between ministers. The real reason the Belgian ambassador looked like he was sitting on a thumbtack. Your conversations begin in whispers. Sometimes it's gentle. You reassure him about the loyalty of his ministers, gently redirect his latest plan to annex a small Italian principality, or distract him from a diplomatic slight with a carefully timed joke about the British and their tea obsession. You mention the latest charity project, the needs of Parisian orphans, the state of the orphanage roof, always finding a way to slip real policy between the folds of daily life. But sometimes, it's tense. Decisions must be made, appointments, dismissals, or, worst of all, declarations of war. Here, you can raise an eyebrow, voice a doubt, or challenge his reasoning without the risk of offending a room full of generals. You have learned the art of the gentle veto, the strategic pause, the pointed silence that signals let sleep on it without ever saying the words. If Napoleon III is the public face of France, you are the soft-voiced editor, wielding influence with a touch, a sigh, and a persuasive argument disguised as concern for his health. Of course, not everything is high politics. There are lighter moments, playful teasing about his latest poem, debates about which poodle is the cleverest, the drama of choosing tomorrow's breakfast pastries. Even the most powerful couple in Europe has time for a midnight snack and a complaint about the new mattress. But beneath every joke, every late-night story, is a constant thread of calculation. The palace is full of spies, the bedroom is full of secrets. Occasionally, decisions are made here that change the course of nations. A quiet agreement to host a state visit. The subtle endorsement of a new minister. Once, between brushing your hair and undoing your earrings, you averted a diplomatic disaster simply by suggesting the emperor go to bed early and think things over in the morning. France owes more to sleep than it realizes. By the time the candles gutter low and the city quiets outside your window, policy has been made, battles postponed, and at least one piece of gossip transformed into imperial strategy. You drift off beside the emperor, knowing that sometimes the fate of Europe depends less on grand speeches than on what gets whispered between the sheets. And as you fall asleep, you wonder, if pillow talk is this complicated, what do ordinary people talk about before bed? You might think palace life is a non-stop carousel of banquets, balls, and dramatic intrigue. Sometimes it is, but more often it's a grueling schedule of ceremonies so endless, so repetitive, so mind-numbingly detailed that you begin to suspect the architects of Versailles were secretly inventing new kinds of boredom. Each day's schedule is mapped out with the precision of a military campaign. You are shuttled from chamber to salon to drawing room, always slightly overdressed and always slightly late, trailed by an entourage that could staff a small cruise ship. If you ever pause to breathe, a lady in waiting will appear with an urgent whisper. Majesty, the Duke of Something is waiting for you to admire his new medal. There is never a break. You are expected to glide seamlessly from audience to reception, from a ribbon cutting for a new bridge to the ceremonial unveiling of yet another bust of Napoleon. Ceremonies are the worst offenders. The receiving lines stretch for hours. Dignitaries file past, each with their own practiced bow, handshake, or awkward attempt at French. You offer the same smile so many times you begin to worry it might detach and wander off on its own. There are medals to be pinned, sashes to be bestowed, and commemorative photographs that require you to stand perfectly still while thinking about the meaninglessness of commemorative photographs. And then come the speeches. There are always speeches. You must listen to them with the earnest interest of a child at their own birthday party. Even as the words blur into a soup of flattery, platitudes, and historical references no one remembers. On this most illustrious occasion they begin, and you can already feel your brain start to hum in protest. You have perfected the art of nodding, smiling, and occasionally dabbing your eyes with a handkerchief at the correct emotional crescendo. You are never sure what's being celebrated, only that it seems to require endless applause. The afternoons bring a new flavor of suffering. The social visit. You are obliged to call on every eligible duchess, countess, and marquise within riding distance. Each visit follows the same script. Tea is poured, cakes are passed, and small talk begins its slow, merciless crawl. You discuss the weather, the state of the roads, the merits of last season's hats, and the health of distant cousins. Sometimes for excitement, you hear a rumor about someone's cousin's dog. You pretend to care. Balls and concerts, supposedly the highlight of social life, are their own unique endurance test. Dancing is dictated by an order of precedence that requires a flowchart. You spend more time waiting to be invited onto the floor than actually dancing. The music is grand, the candles are bright, and you are quietly counting the minutes until it's polite to feign exhaustion and make your escape. And all the while, you are watched. Everyone is watching, judging your posture, your conversation, your ability to feign interest in a fourth retelling of the Battle of Austerlitz by a baron who wasn't even there. You become an expert at polite laughter, at smiling with your eyes while your mind drifts far, far away. Perhaps to a quiet country cottage where nobody wears a sash. At the end of these days, you return to your rooms drained, your jaw sore from smiling, your mind numb from trivia. Court life is a marathon run at a snail's pace, full of beautiful rooms and beautiful people, all pretending they are having the time of their lives. And yet, you survive, one small talk session at a time. Because, after all, it's not the grandeur that breaks you, it's the tedium. If you thought being Empress was a full-time job, just wait until you're responsible for producing and raising the next generation of miniature royalty. While the entire nation observes and judges every decision, parenting is never easy. But palace parenting is a competitive sport, a live performance, and occasionally a public relations crisis all rolled into one. Mornings begin not with gentle lullabies, but with a small mob of governesses, tutors, and assorted nursemaids swooping in for the day's first briefing. There's a daily schedule posted for the children that makes your own look like a spa retreat. Arithmetic at 8, history at 9, fencing at 10, embroidery for the girls, Latin declensions for the boys, and at least 1 hour reserved for character development, which mostly means learning how not to trip over ceremonial sashes. You'd like to enjoy a peaceful breakfast with your offspring, but there is always an audience. Watchful eyes of staff, visiting dignitaries, and, inevitably, the mother-in-law. Every morsel your child consumes is scrutinized. Every spill is met with a collective gasp. And heaven help you if a royal toddler throws a croissant. The press will have a field day. Last week, your daughter hid 2 pastries in her pocket, which resulted in a full page of speculation about Empress's secret rations in the morning paper. Discipline is complicated. You can't raise your voice, and you certainly can't threaten timeouts, not with 3 footmen and a duchess observing from the corner. Instead, you perfect the imperial glare. A look so powerful it could wilt fresh roses at 40 paces. It is surprisingly effective, though it doesn't work on the family parrot, who seems to thrive on chaos and once repeated an unfortunate phrase during a state dinner. Education is the family's highest priority. Your children are expected to speak 3 languages, ride before they can walk, and have opinions on the agricultural policies of at least 5 regions of France by the age of 10. Tutors parade in and out all day, each more determined than the last to instill virtue and vocabulary. You secretly keep a running tally, of which instructors will last the month. The record is 9 days, held by a Latin tutor who foolishly corrected the emperor's pronunciation of veni, vidi, vici. And then there are hobbies. One child collects beetles and insists on displaying them at tea. Another composes operas on the pianoforte, usually at dawn. Your youngest wants to become a pastry chef, which would be charming if it didn't result in a kitchen explosion every other Thursday. The palace cat has gained 2 pounds from all the experiments and has started sleeping in the silverware drawer for its own protection. Royal birthdays are major state occasions. What should be a simple family party is instead a minor diplomatic event, complete with a list of presents to approve, a guest list longer than some battles, and a cake taller than your children. Everyone wants to be photographed with the heir, and no one wants to be caught holding the baby when it inevitably starts crying. Through it all, you strive to be a normal parent, whatever that means in a palace. You sneak in bedtime stories, patch up scraped knees, and sometimes, when the day is finally quiet, you watch your children sleep and marvel that anyone survives growing up under this much scrutiny. At the end of the day, after the governesses retreat and the tutors surrender, you tuck your children into beds bigger than most Parisian apartments. You smooth their hair, whisper encouragement, and hope they grow up kind, clever, and only mildly eccentric. Because one day, the whole circus will be theirs to run. And all you can do is prepare them for the spotlight and teach them how to keep a straight face when the family parrot starts quoting Voltaire. They say that being Empress means living in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury. They forget to mention the other birds, courtiers, whispering, watching, waiting for you to blink. Welcome to the palace ecosystem, where every smile has an edge, and half the people addressing you as Majesty are also hoping you'll trip on your hem. The court is a delicate balancing act, equal parts high society, high drama, and high stakes. No one ever tells you that your real opponents aren't the foreign dignitaries or plotting ministers. It's the people sitting next to you at dinner. The ones who laugh just a bit too hard at the emperor's jokes, and always have a helpful suggestion for your wardrobe. Rivalry is as natural here as breathing. It's just dressed up in silk and lace. Take your official circle. Ladies in waiting with memories sharper than their embroidery needles. Chamberlains with eyes everywhere. And a selection of visiting countesses, all determined to outshine one another and you. The stakes? Everything from a front row seat at the opera to the right to serve you tea on Wednesdays. You suspect some would sell their family vineyards for a new title or an extra jewel on their fan. But then there are the true frenemies. These are the ones who perfect the art of backhanded compliments. Your gown is so daring, Majesty. I wish I had your confidence. Or the ever-popular, I do hope you're getting enough rest. You seem so spirited today. They offer you recipes, hair advice, and just enough gossip to keep you guessing their real intentions. Their faces beam at you in public. Their real thoughts are traded in the corridors 3 minutes after you leave. Now, there's always one. Let's call her the Duchess of Perpetual Disapproval. You could invent cold fusion in the ballroom, and she'd still find something to criticize. Her signature move is a slow, assessing glance from head to toe, followed by a sigh loud enough for the Belgian ambassador to overhear. Rumor has it she keeps a ledger of your social missteps, cross-referenced by color and day of the week. She claims it's just for fun. You know better. Alliances are as shifting as the Parisian weather. Today's confidant is tomorrow's rival. You share secrets with one courtier only to discover them echoing through the salons hours later, gently rearranged to suit someone else's ambitions. Courtiers gather like birds around a fountain, swapping news, trading insults disguised as flattery, and always listening for the next sign of weakness. Of course, you're not defenseless. You learn to fight back with the weapons of your world. Wit, patience, and the ability to smile serenely while plotting your own minor vengeance. Sometimes, the best strategy is to act oblivious. Let the courtiers underestimate you while you quietly secure the loyalty of a new ally, or slip a helpful hint to the emperor about the true source of that anonymous letter. Once, you orchestrated a wardrobe mix-up that resulted in the Duchess arriving at a garden party dressed for a funeral. It took her a week to recover. Occasionally, real friendships bloom in this hothouse of competition, genuine laughter, heartfelt advice, and the relief of being with someone who understands the absurdity of it all. But mostly, you keep your guard up, your ears open, and your enemies close, if only to make sure they can't poison your morning tea. At day's end, you look around at the glittering crowd and remind yourself, here, survival isn't about swords or armies. It's about smiles, secrets, and knowing exactly how to outlast your rivals, one duchess and one excruciatingly polite conversation at a time. After a morning of ceremonies and a lunchtime spent parrying with courtiers, you'd think an empress could retreat quietly to her chambers. But alas, history and fashion demand otherwise. The afternoon calls for the daily ride, a ritual so French, so full of tradition, and so ripe for chaos that it could only belong to the imperial household. The ride is not about leisure, it's about spectacle. You emerge onto the palace steps in full regalia, escorted by grooms, footmen, and a lady-in-waiting who looks as if she'd rather be facing a firing squad. The horses are perfectly groomed, the saddles polished to a blinding shine, and your chosen mount, let's call her Celestine, regards you with the skepticism of someone who remembers last week's hat incident. Speaking of hats, yours is a minor engineering marvel, plumed, beribboned, and so precariously balanced that a strong gust could launch it into the next arrondissement. The milliner swore it would evoke confidence and elegance, but you suspect it mostly evokes terror among small children and nervous diplomats. Mounting the horse is a ceremony unto itself. A discreet but determined squad of attendants hoists, steadies, and if necessary, offers prayers. All the while a crowd has gathered to watch, palace staff, passing aristocrats, and a few hopeful artists waiting to immortalize your inevitable tumble. You manage to settle into the saddle without catastrophe. This alone feels like a minor victory. The procession sets off through the palace gates and into the Bois de Boulogne, Paris's most fashionable riding ground. Here, the paths are lined with chestnut trees and, more importantly, with people who have nothing better to do than judge your posture. Every carriage, every couple, every solitary poet perched on a bench pauses to assess your seat, your poise, and your ability to keep your skirts out of the mud. At least the air smells of greenery, a welcome break from candle smoke and palace perfumes. Birds trill. Sunlight dapples the leaves. For a fleeting moment, you almost believe the ride could be pleasant. Then Celestine spots a stray poodle in a ruffled collar. She snorts, sidesteps, and you clutch the reins with the desperate determination of someone trying to negotiate a new trade agreement. Your entourage is all elegance and grace, riding side saddle, chattering about the opera, and pretending not to notice the gardener sprinting after a runaway goose. This is all part of the spectacle. If you look serene, no one will guess that your right foot is asleep and your left knee is plotting rebellion. Sometimes, the route includes a show of imperial benevolence, waving at passing citizens, tossing coins to children, or pausing for an impromptu portrait by a local artist who has painted every empress since Josephine. You smile, you wave, and you hope no one notices the bead of sweat rolling down your neck or the grass stain developing on your hem. Disaster is always one hoofbeat away. One afternoon, a courier's trumpet startled the horses, leading to what can only be described as a low-grade stampede. Your hat was last seen heading for the Seine. Your lady-in-waiting nearly rode into a rosebush, and the emperor's nephew fell off his pony with all the dignity of a sack of flour. The press called it an invigorating display of imperial spirit. You called it Tuesday. Eventually, the ride winds down, hats are recovered or replaced, and you return to the palace in one piece, if a bit disheveled. The crowd disperses, the horses are led away, and you're left with a sense of accomplishment. You survived another afternoon, another test of grace, balance, and social scrutiny. And if you manage to stay upright and keep your hat on, well, by court standards, that's a triumph. After a day spent smiling, waving, and desperately clutching your hat, you'd think the Empress could simply collapse into a chair and call it an evening. Not so fast. Before dinner, before any hope of privacy, you must submit to the real tyranny of the court, the nightly beauty ritual. Welcome to a world where self-care means being professionally buffed, powdered, and dabbed with substances that may or may not be on a modern hazardous materials list. Your chambers transform into a salon. The air fills with the scent of rosewater, lavender, and underneath it all, a hint of something sharper, probably from the lead-based face cream everyone swears by. There's a beauty consultant, a hairdresser, a perfumer, and a woman whose only job seems to be heating towels and looking judgmental. You take your seat as the star attraction at the Imperial Spa, wishing you could swap places with the parrot. The process begins with a cleanse, soft cloths, warm milk, and the gentle abrasions of ground almond paste. You're exfoliated until your skin glows, or possibly pleads for mercy. Next comes the mysterious rejuvenating mask, a mixture of egg whites, honey, and just a dash of vinegar, left on until you start to wonder if this is actually a French meringue recipe. No one speaks of the secret imperial lotion, rumored to contain everything from snail mucin to crushed pearls. You ask what's in it, and the perfumer just smiles and changes the subject. Your hair, battered by wind and hats, is next. It's brushed, oiled, and rearranged into something approximating order, with the addition of a nourishing tonic that stings your scalp and smells faintly of radishes. For those struggling with the perils of grey hair, there's always a tincture, equal parts confidence and questionable chemistry, that leaves your pillowcase streaked but your public image untarnished. And then, the makeup. This is not the natural glow of a peasant at harvest. This is war paint. First, a layer of white lead paste to smooth the complexion. If it's slightly toxic, so be it. Fashion demands sacrifices, sometimes neurological. Then, a dusting of rice powder, a dab of rouge, made from crushed insects, and just enough kohl to make your eyes look soulful without suggesting you're planning a coup. Let's not forget the teeth. No fluoride here, just a ritual brushing with powdered charcoal, and the hope that lemon juice will keep the stains at bay. You swish, you spit, you try not to think about enamel. The result, a smile fit for a portrait, and gums that tingle with the thrill of historical inaccuracy. Fragrance is the final, inescapable step. The perfumer presents a menu of scents, all with poetic names like Evening Dew or Imperial Blush, each with undertones of civet, ambergris, or something vaguely barnyard. You choose the least overpowering and are misted from head to toe. A walking cloud of ambition and anxiety. Through it all, attendants whisper encouragement. Your Majesty glows tonight. Such a youthful bloom. You thank them, wondering if the bloom is from the cream or the mild allergic reaction. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you remember a simpler time. Bathing in cold water, hair unbrushed, face free of experimental chemistry. But those days are gone. When the ritual is finally complete, you emerge dazzling, fragrant, and only slightly radioactive. The candles catch your cheekbones, the mirrors approve, and you're ready to face another night, imperial, immaculate, and just a little bit dangerous. After all, in a world obsessed with youth and beauty, you can never be too careful or too well preserved. If there's one consolation for living your life as a public spectacle, it's the shopping. Empresses may not have privacy, but they do have accounts with every fashionable merchant in Paris. In the Second Empire, shopping is not just an activity, it's a full-scale diplomatic event. You don't simply buy a dress. You practically sign a peace treaty with silk merchants, milliners, and jewelers along the way. The day's shopping excursion begins with the arrival of the list, a formidable document compiled by the chief lady in waiting, approved by your secretary, and cross-referenced by the imperial accountant. Need gloves? Add them to the list. Need a hat? Specify the size, shape, and whether you want it to look authoritative or faintly mysterious. Every item is a line in the ongoing battle for social supremacy, but you rarely venture out in person. No, that would invite chaos on the streets of Paris, a traffic jam of carriages, gawkers, and amateur portraitists sketching your shoes from a discreet distance. Instead, the shopping comes to you. Your morning is interrupted by an endless parade of shopkeepers, each carrying their wares in hat boxes, velvet-lined cases, and enough tissue paper to wrap the Arc de Triomphe. There's the milliner, breathlessly displaying the latest in feathered extravagance. The glove maker, armed with measuring tapes and opinions. The dressmaker, presenting bolts of fabric so luxurious you feel like you should apologize to the silkworms. Sometimes there's a jeweler, whose diamonds are described in poetic terms, dewdrops at dawn, tears of Venus. something to distract from that unfortunate Prussian incident. You are expected to examine everything. Turn the hat in your hands, consider the embroidery, try on the gloves, a process that requires its own small support staff, and murmur polite, imperial approval. Choices matter. The blue or the green, the lace or the silk. Each selection sends a message to the court, the press, and occasionally entire trading partners. Payment is never immediate. There are bills, receipts, and records to be signed in triplicate. The imperial purse is deep, but the paperwork is deeper. The accountant hovers, eyeing every expense as though you are personally bankrupting France by ordering an extra pair of slippers. He'll politely inquire if the new parasol is strictly necessary. You'll politely remind him that, as Empress, everything you purchase is strictly necessary. Sometimes, you long for the ordinary thrill of wandering through a market, haggling over fruit, or picking out a ribbon for no reason at all. Instead, your life is spent between the drawing room and the fitting room, watched by a team of assistants, and trailed by a wake of polite but desperate shopkeepers hoping for a royal endorsement. Of course, there are perks. If you desire a particular gown, the entire house of Worth may drop everything to deliver it by sunset. Paris's finest perfumers will concoct a scent based on the exact fragrance of your favorite garden in spring. You can summon a bouquet, a cake, or a set of gloves with a snap of your fingers. Or at least, with a very carefully worded note. But retail therapy, Imperial Edition, is never just about you. Every purchase is an act of state, every wardrobe choice, a matter for gossip columns. The right hat can launch 1,000 imitations. The wrong shoes can start a rumor that echoes from the Tuileries to St. Petersburg. In the end, you survey the day's acquisitions. Hats, gloves, silks, and a faint sense of accomplishment. You've survived another round of shopping, a little poorer on paper, but far richer in fashion. And with any luck, you'll be able to wear at least one new dress before it's out of style or out of political favor. For most mortals, dinner is a time to relax, nourish, and maybe sneak a second helping of potatoes. For you, Empress of France, dinner is a marathon, a public event, a diplomatic gauntlet, and a test of your digestive fortitude. The court's love of food is legendary, and every meal is equal parts spectacle and survival. It begins with the procession. You do not simply walk to dinner. You are led, heralded, and announced by someone whose only job is to say your name correctly and loudly enough for the kitchen staff to synchronize the sauce. The dining room itself is a cathedral to appetite. Chandeliers blazing, gold, leaf glittering, and tables set with more forks than anyone could possibly need in a single lifetime. Each place is assigned with military precision. You sit at the center, a beacon in a sea of anxious nobles. The menu is less what's for dinner and more how much of France can be served in one evening. The chef, a man of passionate temperament and trembling assistance, sends out course after course. Velvety soups, towers of shellfish, roast meats sculpted to resemble famous generals, and vegetables arranged in patterns that probably require a degree in engineering. The real star, of course, is the foie gras. Its arrival is treated with more ceremony than the birth of an heir. Conversation hushes, spoons poised. The taste is divine, rich, creamy, with just a hint of the moral ambiguity that makes it irresistible to the French aristocracy. You smile, take your bite, and hope no one sees you discreetly avoiding the aspic. Every bite is scrutinized. Eating too little suggests offense. Eating too much, a lack of refinement. The courtiers have mastered the art of the diplomatic nibble. Small bites, long pauses, and the ability to speak eloquently about agricultural policy while hiding Brussels sprouts in their napkins. Wine flows freely, matched to each dish with such seriousness that you'd think the fate of Europe depended on the perfect pairing. It might. Then come the sauces, elaborate, mysterious, with names that sound suspiciously like royal titles. One evening, you encountered a sauce bonne femme so complicated that it required a diagram, a notary, and a blessing from the Archbishop of Paris. Dessert is its own saga. Spun sugar, pastries, and a mountain of fruit piled so high you wonder if there's a person trapped inside, trying to signal for help with a candied orange peel. But the greatest danger is not overeating. It's the conversation. Dinners are prime time for gossip, alliances, and subtle threats. The Duke to your left insists on recounting the history of every dish since the Edict of Nantes. The Baroness to your right accidentally spills wine on her rival. Across the table, the Emperor launches into a passionate monologue about railroads, while the Ambassador of Spain quietly goes pale at the mention of garlic. As the meal winds down, you feel both victorious and faintly ill. There's a final toast, a round of applause for the chef, and the ceremonial loosening of stays under the tablecloth. You make your exit, smile intact, praying that the indigestion holds off until you reach the privacy of your boudoir. French cuisine is an art, a weapon, and a celebration. You survive each feast one cautious bite at a time, grateful that tomorrow's breakfast is just a croissant, and as you drift off to sleep, you dream not of power or politics, but of simple soup and the sweet silence that comes after the last spoon has been set down. Beneath the glitter and spectacle, after the parades and the endless performances, there's an emptiness no amount of velvet can quite disguise. Being Empress means never being alone, but somehow always feeling a little bit lonely. The palace, filled with hundreds of staff and the endless shuffle of visitors, can become the quietest place in Paris when the doors finally close and the candles gutter low. You keep up appearances, of course. Your days are an endless waltz of obligations, your smile unfailing, your poise unbreakable. But in the moments between, when the courtiers retreat, the ministers stop whispering, and the echoes of laughter fade, you find yourself longing for something simpler, something real. Sometimes you almost envy the maids who can gossip freely, or the gardeners who slip unnoticed into the fresh air, their only company, a spade and the soft earth. You write letters, hundreds of them over the years, each one a lifeline thrown across the chasm of isolation. Some are formal, addressed to foreign queens and dignitaries, dripping with etiquette and diplomacy. Others are more personal, quiet notes to old friends, confessions scribbled late at night to sisters and cousins in far-off places. Letters are where you can set down the weight of the crown and, for a moment, remember who you used to be before all of France learned your favorite color. But the answers come slowly, if at all. Replies are screened, delayed, sometimes lost in the shuffle of court politics. A letter from home can take weeks to arrive, and even then, it's often read by 3 secretaries and a parrot before you see it. You learn to read between the lines, searching for scraps of affection or the comforting banality of ordinary life. The dog is well, the harvest is late, we miss you at the lake. You are surrounded by people, yet there are very few confidants. Everyone wants something, an audience, a favor, a glimpse of your unguarded self. True friends are rare, and you treasure them like pearls, small, precious, and easily lost in the grandeur of the palace. Occasionally, you try to slip away. A walk alone in the garden, a few minutes with a favorite book, a stolen hour in the chapel, but there is always someone searching for you, always a summons or a question waiting to break the spell of solitude. Some nights, the loneliness is so heavy it settles in your bones. You sit at your dressing table, surrounded by gifts and jewels, and wonder if anyone truly sees you at all. You remember simpler days, running barefoot, laughing without care, dreaming without knowing the price of every dream. Now, even joy comes with conditions, and grief must be performed in a way that satisfies the public's sense of decorum. The world thinks you have everything, but they do not see the cost, the endless scrutiny, the pressure to be perfect, the knowledge that one misstep could topple everything. Sometimes you write letters you never send, pouring out the secret sorrows you cannot share with anyone. You tuck them away in a box, your private archive of dreams and disappointments. And yet, you endure. You learn to find comfort in small rituals, the warmth of tea, the feel of pen on paper, the distant sounds of Paris drifting in through the window. You tell yourself that even in this golden cage, you can still be yourself, somewhere, in the quiet, in the dark, in the ink of your letters. Tomorrow, the pageantry will begin again. But for now, in this small, secret hour, you let yourself feel lonely, if only for a while. If you ever wondered what it's like to be the glue that holds together an entire continent, while also worrying about whether you've spilled soup on your sash, welcome to diplomatic life as Empress of France. You are not just a symbol, you are a frontline negotiator, an accidental therapist, and the last fragile barrier between polite conversation and open warfare. Every week, the palace hosts a parade of foreign dignitaries, ambassadors, and people with unpronounceable titles. They arrive bristling with medals, bearing gifts of dubious taste, and accompanied by translators who whisper urgently in 6 languages. Your job is to welcome them, decode their intentions, and smile like you definitely understand the joke about Bavarian sausages. Diplomatic audiences are a test of nerves and neck muscles. You greet the Russian ambassador with just the right amount of warmth, never too effusive, lest you accidentally invite a royal wedding, never too cold, or the Tsar might mobilize the cavalry. The British envoy is next. His sense of humor so dry you fear it may be contagious. He inquires about your garden, compliments your admirable self-control, and then casually mentions the state of the French Navy. You nod, you laugh, you promise to convey the Emperor's regards, while silently praying that nobody brings up the awkward subject of last year's disastrous state dinner, when a Prussian delegate was nearly impaled by a flying vol-au-vent. Politics is a game of faces, and yours must remain serenely unreadable at all times. The grand receptions are even worse. Picture a ballroom packed with half of Europe, each guest dancing an invisible minuet of alliances, suspicions, and barely concealed jealousy. The champagne flows, the orchestra plays, and you glide from group to group like a ship tacking through diplomatic fog. You listen to stories about sheep exports, weather patterns, and the relative merits of Belgian lace, all while keeping track of who is speaking to whom and whether the Spanish ambassador's smile means friendship or imminent betrayal. Sometimes, crises unfold in real time, a whispered message, a sudden frown, and you're whisked aside by a panicked advisor. Majesty, there is a situation. Perhaps the Ottoman envoy is offended by the dessert. Or the Neapolitan prince has lost his monocle. Again. You deploy your most reassuring tone and say, "How delightful," while mentally calculating the odds of an international incident before dessert. Every conversation, every gesture, every offhand remark could end up in tomorrow's newspaper, or worse, in a telegram to St. Petersburg. You are always on, always aware that diplomacy is theatre, and you are the star performer who cannot afford to flub a single line. Even the fan in your hand is a prop, used to signal approval, amusement, or, in one desperate case, complete confusion. At times, you wish you could drop the act, kick off your shoes, and just talk honestly with someone who isn't plotting a treaty or an annexation. But honesty is risky currency here. So you smile, nod, and become fluent in the art of saying nothing in 50 words or less. At the end of the day, you collapse in your chambers, mentally replaying every conversation, every handshake, and every subtle hint you may have missed. You wonder if peace in Europe is really just a matter of keeping a straight face, or if there's a secret handbook that everyone forgot to give you. Tomorrow will bring a new wave of diplomats, a new collection of coded smiles and veiled threats. For now, you take comfort in the fact that, at least tonight, France is not at war. And if it is, nobody mentioned it over dessert. You might imagine that being Empress means living above the chaos, untouched by rumor and gossip, serenely drifting through your days on a cloud of silk and respectability. In reality, your greatest threat isn't revolution or invasion, it's scandal. And in the Second Empire, scandal is a national sport, played at home and away. Let's start with the French press. Every Parisian with a pen and a grudge can become a journalist overnight, and there are entire newspapers devoted to nothing but your supposed adventures, mistakes, and breakfast preferences. One day you're praised for your charitable works, the next lampooned for the color of your gloves. You could rescue a dozen orphans from a fire, and someone would still run a cartoon suggesting you only did it for the photo opportunity. If the bakery runs out of croissants, there's a rumor you bought them all for your poodles. Your staff scrambles to stay ahead of the headlines. There's the court correspondent, whose main job is to issue firm denials of things that didn't happen, and tepid confirmations of things that probably did. Then there's the unofficial palace spy network, passing you notes about which columnists are angling for an invitation and which scandal is about to break. Sometimes you read the papers just to find out what you've allegedly done this week. It's rarely accurate, but always entertaining. But the real risk is closer to home, your own family. Nothing can upstage an ambitious newspaper quite like a bored cousin or a reckless nephew. The imperial clan is large, restless, and full of people who never met a secret they didn't want to share. Some relatives are discreet. Others believe the dinner table is the ideal place to reveal embarrassing childhood stories or accidentally leak state secrets to a room full of servants. Your mother-in-law has never met a rumor she couldn't improve with a little embroidery. Your husband, Napoleon III, occasionally causes incidents of his own, misplaced correspondence, impulsive policy declarations, and, once, mistaking a duchess's chihuahua for his own. The family parrot, already notorious for repeating unfortunate phrases, once shouted affair in the middle of a diplomatic tea, sending 3 embassies into a panic. When things really heat up, you must act fast. Your best tool is the art of the calm, elegant denial. You cultivate an air of serene indifference, as if the world's wildest accusations barely register. The Empress was at home all evening. Her Majesty does not own 17 hats shaped like swans. That was not the Austrian ambassador in the shrubbery. It was a gardener with a limp. You learn to address a crisis with a raised eyebrow, a practiced smile, and, if all else fails, a new charity ball to distract the papers. You also become adept at private damage control. Quick notes are dispatched to family members, reminding them to keep certain anecdotes to themselves and avoid the press at all costs. You invite troublesome relatives to remote hunting lodges or restorative spa visits, preferably in regions with poor postal service. Of course, sometimes you have to let a story run its course. The news cycle turns quickly, and what scandal today will be forgotten tomorrow, usually replaced by a fresh disaster or a new rivalry. As long as you remain composed, poised, and just a little mysterious, the world moves on. At the end of each week, you survive with your reputation, mostly intact. In the palace, there will always be fresh gossip, new headlines, and another round of family drama. Your job is to keep smiling, keep calm, and never let them see you sweat. Because in France, scandals pass, but style endures. You might think an empress lives in a bubble of lace and crystal, but at least once a week, you must venture out and connect with the people. It's part public relations, part obligation, and all theatre. Charity visits are the state's way of reminding France that, beneath the diamonds and diplomatic headaches, you have a heart, or at least a very good team of advisors who remind you where to direct it. It usually starts with a flurry of invitations, hospitals, orphanages, schools, and almshouses, all hoping for a royal blessing, or at least a signed portrait for the fundraising raffle. Your schedule is ruthlessly organized. 20 minutes at the children's hospital, 10 minutes shaking hands at the bakery, a quick word with the mayor about potholes, and then onward, waving until your wrist aches and your smile feels glued in place. Palace staff descend in advance, scrubbing, polishing, and prepping each location as if the emperor himself were coming. Fresh flowers are arranged with military precision. Children are lined up, clean-faced and terrified, clutching bouquets with the desperation of a hostage exchange. The local priest polishes his best speech, and the press is always lurking, pens at the ready to catch the moment you sneeze or appear not to enjoy the pastries. You arrive by carriage, trailing velvet, pearls, and a carefully curated expression of benevolent interest. The crowd surges forward, everyone eager for a glimpse, a handshake, or a whispered blessing. You nod, smile, and attempt to remember the protocol for greeting nuns versus bakers versus local politicians with questionable moustaches. First stop, the orphanage. You're presented with a sea of anxious faces, each child wearing their best or only shoes. You distribute coins, hand out sweets, and pat heads as gently as possible, aware that every gesture is being recorded for posterity. And probably tomorrow's newspaper, someone always cries. Sometimes it's you, sometimes it's the staff, and occasionally it's the family parrot who has stowed away in your carriage and now refuses to leave. Next, you tour the hospital wards, rows of beds, endless bouquets, and the faint scent of disinfectant and hope. You offer kind words, hold trembling hands, and listen to stories of miraculous recoveries and suspiciously convenient healings scheduled to coincide with your visit. You're reminded that illness and poverty are far more common than tiaras and state banquets, and you're quietly grateful that your own worst complaint is a too tight corset. After the formalities, it's time for the dreaded public handshake. You reach out to people of all shapes, sizes, and hygiene levels, some with hands rough from labor, others sticky with excitement or jam. You learn quickly to keep a lace handkerchief tucked in your sleeve for emergencies. The mayor tries to corner you for a photo. The baker insists you taste the local bread. And a group of school children recites a poem in your honor. Halfway through, the smallest one forgets her lines and bursts into tears. You kneel, smooth her hair, and whisper reassurance, fully aware the sketch artists will immortalize this moment as proof of your maternal instincts. Charity visits are exhausting. The carriage ride home is blissfully silent, except for the parrot repeating, "Good job, Majesty," until you consider tossing him out the window. You wonder if your efforts really make a difference, or if it's all just ceremony and spectacle. But as you tuck away the thank you notes and faded bouquets, you hope that, for someone, it meant something more. Because even an empress, behind the velvet and the etiquette, is still just a person trying to do a little good, one awkward handshake at a time. If there's one thing more dangerous than politics or pastry at the French court, it's fashion. The world expects the Empress to be the pinnacle of style, every hemline an inspiration, every hat a trend. But what nobody tells you is how easy it is for a single ruffle to trigger a chain reaction of embarrassment that echoes all the way from Paris to Vienna. It begins with the morning fitting. Your dresser presents you with a gown so stiff and complicated it could double as structural support for the palace roof. Every pleat is engineered, every ribbon positioned with surgical precision. It takes a small committee just to fasten the last row of pearl buttons. But no matter how many people check, double-check, and whisper prayers to sans couture, the odds of a wardrobe malfunction remain distressingly high. You parade through the day surrounded by layers of petticoats, corsetry, sashes, and lace. The effect is stunning from a distance. Up close, it's a logistical nightmare. Walking requires planning. Sitting is a feat of geometry. Descending a staircase becomes an exercise in fate and friction. You move with the grace of someone desperately hoping their undergarments stay under. The real test comes in public. At court receptions, garden parties, or state banquets, every set of eyes is trained on your silhouette, your hemline, your hat angle. A single gust of wind in the Tuileries can turn an elegant entrance into slapstick. You live in constant dread of stepping on your own train, getting caught on a stray piece of furniture, or, heaven forbid, having a rogue hoop escape its moorings and try to lead a breakaway movement. Everyone remembers the famous petticoat incident. It was a blustery March afternoon. The emperor was unveiling a statue, and you, resplendent in lavender taffeta, were smiling for the assembled press. Suddenly, a vengeful breeze swept through the square, flipping your skirt in a display of physics that would have shocked Newton. For a brief, eternal moment, Paris was treated to the sight of the Empress's petticoats, and possibly the family monogram. The caricaturists worked overtime. The next day's headlines read, "Majesty's modesty takes flight." You still find sketches of that moment tucked into official paperwork and diplomatic pouches. Even on calmer days, the hazards are many. You once sat down without checking your seat and emerged with a cluster of rose petals clinging strategically to your bustle. At a diplomatic dinner, your sleeve caught the arm of a passing butler, nearly toppling a soup tureen into the lap of the Swedish ambassador. The event became known, in official correspondence, as the Bisque crisis. Hats are no safer. Whether towering with feathers or trailing netting, they catch on chandeliers, attack innocent bystanders, and occasionally migrate sideways mid-conversation. There are at least 3 portraits in existence where your hat appears to be fleeing your head in terror. Through it all, you maintain composure, or at least try to. Your saving grace is the ability to laugh at yourself, and the knowledge that everyone, even the most glamorous, is only one snapped ribbon away from disaster. The courtiers may whisper, the artists may sketch, but you walk on, carefully, determined to turn every stumble into a new style. After all, if you can't survive a little public shame, you're in the wrong palace. And who knows? Today's fashion fiasco might be tomorrow's trend. In the end, you hang up your gown, set aside your hat, and hope for a quieter tomorrow. But in your heart, you know, fashion may be fickle, but the stories last forever. For most people, the opera is a rare treat, an escape into music and melodrama, a night of elegance and awe. For you, Empress of France, the opera is another royal obligation, a glamorous endurance contest played out beneath golden chandeliers and the gaze of 1,000 spectators. The evening begins with the usual prelude, a gown selected for maximum impact, jewels distributed across your person like battle honors, and a hat engineered to block the view of at least one rival duchess. There's a last-minute reminder from your lady-in-waiting about which composer's niece you are supposed to compliment and which aria not to clap for. Politics lurk in every octave. You practice your applause in the carriage, the perfect blend of regal enthusiasm and subtle restraint. Arrival at the opera house is pure spectacle. Crowds gather for a glimpse of the imperial party, flashbulbs pop, and the press jots down notes on your posture, your hairstyle, and, inevitably, your companion's tie. You ascend the steps with a practiced smile, conscious that every movement will be discussed tomorrow over coffee and scandal. Inside, your box awaits. Plush, velvet, lined, strategically placed for maximum visibility. You are simultaneously the audience and the show. Opera glasses train on your every reaction. Did the Empress enjoy the overture? Did she stifle a yawn? Was that a tear or just a stray eyelash? Your emotions are public property, dissected by society columnists and amateur body language experts. The performance begins. The orchestra swells, the curtain rises, and a parade of sopranos, tenors, and unlikely plot twists fills the stage. The music is sublime at first. You watch, you listen, you nod appreciatively. But after the third tragic duet and the 14th minute of dramatic silence, your mind wanders. You count chandeliers, study the embroidery on the seat in front of you, and wonder if the bass is wearing the same wig as last week. The true challenge is staying awake. 5 acts, each more elaborate than the last, stretch far into the night. The opera house is warm, the velvet is soft, and your seat reclines just enough to encourage daydreams. Around you, courtiers furtively pinch themselves, fans flutter to hide the occasional yawn, and even the emperor looks as if he might drift off during a particularly mournful aria. Once, you caught the Minister of War dozing with his mouth open. He claimed he was pondering the fate of Europe. You become a master of the dignified nap, a subtle tilt of the head, a careful placement of the fan, and a serene expression that suggests deep reflection on the power of art, rather than the desperate desire for a pillow. Occasionally, you are roused by a sudden crescendo or an enthusiastic brava from the next box, jolting upright and joining the applause with a regal flourish. The final curtain falls to thunderous applause. Flowers are thrown, bouquets exchanged, and you are obliged to visit the cast backstage. An ordeal of congratulations, diplomatic kisses, and the delicate art of not stepping on a prima donna's train. You offer compliments, dispense smiles, and sign programs, already dreaming of your bed. Back at the palace, you finally collapse into your chambers, grateful that your greatest performance is over for the night. You survived another evening in the imperial spotlight, another round of art and applause, and, if you're honest, a little napping in public. Tomorrow, the critics will speculate about your taste in music and your mysterious aura of serenity. You know the truth. Sometimes, an empress just needs a 5-act nap. After a day spent parading through ceremonies, navigating courtly intrigues, and surviving a marathon at the opera, you'd think falling asleep would be simple. You'd be wrong. For the Empress, bedtime is not the end of the day. It's just a new chapter of obligations, rituals, and, occasionally, quiet rebellion. Your nightly retreat begins with the closing of doors, the click of locks, and a collective sigh from your staff. Maids whisk away discarded gowns, tuck shoes into embroidered sachets, and ensure your dressing table is perfectly arranged. The hairdresser removes the last pins from your elaborate coiffure, occasionally with a whispered apology for the ones still tangled in your curls. Someone brings you a glass of warm milk, a relic of childhood comfort, or perhaps just a polite hint to wind down. Before you can relax, you must navigate the bedtime rituals. The washing, the moisturizing, the strategic application of beauty ointments, so strong they could double as paint remover. Letters are read, notes signed, and last-minute decisions made for tomorrow's events. You sign off on menus, review lists of visitors, and sometimes approve fabric swatches, because apparently pillowcases are a matter of state. If you're lucky, you find a few minutes for yourself. You sit at your vanity, brush your hair, and stare at your own tired eyes, searching for the girl you used to be before titles and tiaras. There is solace in these small, private routines, a familiar perfume, a favorite silk robe, the comforting weight of a well-loved book. On special nights, you write letters to friends, pouring your true self onto paper, knowing that at least a piece of you escapes the palace walls. But bedtime is never just yours. There are always interruptions. A knock on the door, an anxious chamberlain, a message from the emperor, or the nursemaid needing your signature for the children's medicine. Occasionally, the parrot escapes from its cage and must be coaxed down from the wardrobe before it can broadcast your end-of-day confessions to the staff. Some nights, the stress refuses to melt away. You replay conversations, revisit awkward moments, and worry over the day's tiniest blunders. Did you smile enough at the charity event? Was your French accent too obvious at dinner? Is the emperor really planning to redesign the ballroom? The mind of an empress is a busy place after midnight. On especially restless nights, you consider a secret escape. Every palace has its hidden passage, a service stair, a forgotten gallery, a quiet terrace where you can breathe without being watched. Sometimes, you slip away for a walk in the moonlit gardens, escorted only by the scent of jasmine and the hope that nobody notices your absence. It's risky, but necessary. Even empresses need air. Eventually, you return to your room, slip between cool sheets, and hope for sleep. Your bed, enormous and fortress-like, is piled with pillows, a bastion against the world. The clock ticks. The city hums beyond the walls. You close your eyes and pray that, just for a few hours, you can forget the empire waiting for you in the morning. As you drift off, you remind yourself, even on the most exhausting days, you are allowed this peace. You survived another round of royal theatre, another day of scrutiny and spectacle. In sleep, you are simply yourself, no titles, no duties, just a tired woman hoping for good dreams. And if you're lucky, tonight you'll dream of escape, not from the palace, but from all the expectations that come with your crown. For years, you lived as if the imperial world would spin on forever. The pageantry, the silk, the daily parade of dignitaries and duchesses. But history, as it turns out, doesn't care about your schedule or your monogrammed napkins. One day, rumors start to rattle the chandeliers. Whispers of unrest become headlines, and suddenly, you realize the empire is no longer just yours to worry over. It's slipping away faster than you can order another hat. At first, everyone pretends nothing's wrong. The official line is temporary difficulty, while staff whisper in corridors and the kitchens run out of champagne. Your husband, Napoleon III, paces his study with a look that suggests he's considering solving the crisis with either a stirring speech or a well-timed nap. Ministers arrive at odd hours, offering advice, demanding decisions, and looking like men who wish they'd invested in railway shares instead. You do what you've always done. Keep up appearances. Dinners are still served, balls are still planned, and bouquets still arrive from distant admirers who have not yet read the morning's news. You practice your most serene smile, hold court as if nothing has changed, and send polite, coded letters to friends in England, just in case. Denial, you discover, is a key component of imperial strategy, but as the situation worsens, even the palace routines begin to unravel. You notice the little things first. The courier who no longer bows, the footmen who speak in urgent whispers, the sudden popularity of plain carriages over the imperial coach. Outside, Paris grows restless. The air buzzes with rumors. Of protests, of armies moving, of friends who have already vanished to the countryside for health reasons. Packing becomes a surreal exercise. What do you take when the empire is falling apart? You walk through your rooms, looking at portraits and treasures, deciding which jewels can be sewn into the hems of your gowns and which memories must be left behind. There's a last-minute scramble for passports, a quick tutorial on how to say "please don't arrest me" in 3 languages, and the frantic stuffing of diaries, letters, and family silver into trunks that seem smaller by the minute. The staff, who once seemed like a permanent part of your world, now melt away, some leaving to join the chaos, others staying loyally by your side, still pressing your dresses and baking you one last batch of comfort pastries. You try to thank everyone, but your voice is thin, your hands shake, and for the first time, you feel as if you're moving through someone else's story. In these final days, panic mingles with absurdity. The parrot escapes, again. After weeks of ceremonies, diplomatic feasts, and the ever-present hum of scandal, the Empress is finally granted what everyone insists is a day of rest. The Imperial Spa Day. In theory, this is your chance to relax, to be pampered and restored. In practice, relaxation in the 19th century comes with its own hazards, mainly mud, medieval medicine, and the lurking threat of leeches. It begins with anticipation and the faint hope that, just for today, you'll be allowed to doze in a sunbeam. Your maid announces the spa schedule in a tone usually reserved for military invasions. There is a revitalizing soak, a restorative wrap, and something the doctor calls blood purification. You smile bravely, but deep down you recall stories of Russian Grand Duchesses who returned from their spa days paler and slightly more traumatized than when they left. First comes the mud bath. You are escorted to a marble chamber filled with the rich, earthy smell of mineral clay and a team of attendants wielding wooden paddles. They smear you with mud so thick you feel like a particularly high-born truffle. The sensation is bizarre, warm, weighty, and just a little bit ticklish. Everyone assures you this is deeply rejuvenating, even as you begin to wonder if you're being prepared for storage in a root cellar. You lie motionless, resisting the urge to giggle, while the court photographer quietly sketches your silhouette for posterity. Next, you're wrapped in hot towels, your arms pinioned like a diplomatic hostage. A doctor enters, bearded, serious, and carrying a box of medical leeches. Yes, leeches. The current theory is that a little bloodletting is good for the royal complexion. And nothing says pampering like small, wriggling creatures with questionable appetites. You submit bravely as 3 are placed on your arm, their work observed by a chorus of fascinated attendants. The sensation is somewhere between gentle suction and mild existential crisis. After the leeches have had their fill, and you've said a silent prayer for modern medicine, you are treated to the ice plunge. It's as horrifying as it sounds. A plunge into a marble tub filled with glacial water, intended to invigorate the humors. You shriek. The attendants murmur approval. Apparently, loud noises mean it's working. You emerge, shivering and wide-eyed, while your hairdresser hurries forward with a towel and something herbal for the nerves. You're then massaged with oils said to align the spirit. The masseuse is built like a Prussian general, and has the hands to match. Every knot and worry is kneaded, pummeled, and occasionally threatened into submission. The perfume of lavender and rosemary fills the room. And, for a few minutes, you do feel transported. Somewhere between bliss and mild disassociation. The day concludes with a light meal of broth, a delicate pastry, and a lecture from the spa physician about the importance of regular leeching. You listen politely, wondering if anyone at the table is secretly hiding snacks. By now, your skin is glowing, your limbs are jelly, and your mind floats somewhere between relaxation and the urgent need to write a letter to the Academy of Sciences. As you're helped into your robe and slippers, you reflect on the curious truth. Relaxation, imperial style, is equal parts ritual and ordeal. You emerge from the spa pampered, polished, and just a little bit grateful that tomorrow you'll only have to face the ordinary perils of palace life. Because really, after a day with mud and leeches, a room full of courtiers doesn't seem so terrifying after all. If there is one activity that truly defines the daily grind of Empress life, Beyond the feasts, the ceremonies, and the existential wrestling matches with your wardrobe, it is letter writing. In a world before emails, text messages, or the sweet silence of do not disturb mode, every thought, favor, request, or complaint is poured onto paper. And nothing is ever simple. Your writing desk is a small battlefield. Laid out before you are piles of heavy stationery, an assortment of quills, inkwells in every imaginable shade of blue, and a mountain of letters waiting for your signature or your scrutiny. Each morning brings a fresh onslaught of correspondence. Invitations from hopeful duchesses, diplomatic notes from rival monarchs, and heartfelt requests from distant cousins who just happen to be short on funds. The process is never solitary. Your secretary perches nearby, pen at the ready, prepared to intercept anything that might lead to scandal or an international incident. Your lady-in-waiting helpfully offers suggestions, perhaps soften the phrase, utter disaster, while the parrot occasionally contributes its own thoughts, which are mercifully ignored. Some letters are easy. A thank you note to a charity committee, a birthday wish for a royal godchild, or a polite refusal of yet another opera invitation. But most are delicate diplomatic puzzles. You must congratulate the King of Belgium on his new palace, without implying that his old one looked like a stable. You must respond to the Tsarina's offer of friendship, while delicately ignoring the rumor that she called your favorite gown aggressively optimistic. Every word is weighed, every phrase calculated, sincerely or most affectionately, with hope for continued peace, or with hope that your troops stay on your side of the border. You have learned the subtle language of passive aggression. A carefully deployed with all due respect can say more than any actual threat. Then there are the dreaded letters to family. The cousin who wants a royal appointment. You know how devoted I am to public service, especially if it pays well. The aunt who demands an explanation for last week's seating chart. The brother-in-law who wishes to discuss his investments in Belgian turnip futures. You draft responses that are friendly, supportive, and, above all, non-committal. How interesting. I shall mention it to the Emperor at the first opportunity. You never specify when that might be. Occasionally, you are tempted to slip in a little drama. A pointed remark about a duchess's habit of arriving late, or a wry observation about the palace's inexplicable draftiness. But every letter is a potential relic for future historians, so your wit must be perfectly sharpened, your sarcasm safely sheathed. Signatures are a performance. Each letter ends with a flourish, sometimes bold and assertive, sometimes looping and elaborate, depending on the intended recipient and your mood. Wax seals are pressed with practiced elegance, as if you're casting a spell of diplomacy across Europe. By late afternoon, your hand is cramped, your eyes blurry, and the inkwells stand empty, a silent tribute to another day of royal correspondence. The desk is tidied, the outgoing pile dispatched, and the parrot congratulated for not shouting anything incriminating. Yet, in these endless letters, there is power. Alliances are shaped, rumors managed, favors exchanged, and grievances gently aired. You may never see all the corners of your empire, but your words travel far and wide, working silent magic on a restless continent. And tomorrow, the inkwell will be filled again, and you'll return to your paper battlefield, one passive-aggressive note at a time. As Empress, you quickly discover that palace life is not all silk sheets and silver spoons. Beneath the surface, elegance runs a current of nerves, an endless game of suspicion, secrecy, and who told the newspapers I have a new hairdresser. Welcome to the shadowy world of the Imperial Secret Police, where the business of state is always mixed with a dash of paranoia. You are never truly alone. Every corridor seems to echo with whispers. Every potted plant might be harboring a listening ear. The official security staff stand guard in their crisp uniforms, all straight backs and serious faces. but it's the unofficial eyes and ears that keep you up at night. Servants who remember everything, gardeners with suspiciously excellent hearing, the footman who always seems to be polishing the same candlestick just a little too close to your conversation. The emperor swears it's necessary. France is a land of revolutionaries and romantics, he explains, and someone is always plotting a pamphlet or an uprising. Secret police reports arrive daily, sometimes disguised as menus, sometimes just slipped discreetly between your letters. You develop the unsettling habit of reading every line, searching for hints. The Countess of Leon was seen in conversation with a Russian gentleman at the ballet. The new chef favors garlic and seditious literature. The Empress's lapdog is popular with the laundry staff. Possible conduit for gossip. Officially, you must remain above suspicion, smiling serenely at everyone from the Prime Minister to the stable boy. Unofficially, you begin to wonder about your own staff. Is your hairdresser just really interested in split ends, or is she reporting your headaches to the Ministry of the Interior? You start testing her, slipping in minor secrets, an invented cold, a taste for Portuguese marmalade, just to see what makes it back to the gossip columns. Tea time becomes a minefield. The Duchess of Perpetual Disapproval stirs her cup, eyes narrowed, asking seemingly innocent questions about next week's itinerary. The page boy who serves the scones never blinks. Even the family parrot has developed a knack for repeating the juiciest rumors at precisely the wrong moment. Once, during a delicate meeting, it screeched, she knows," and sent half the room scrambling for excuses. Of course, the real professionals are nearly invisible. You spot them only in glimpses. A shadow at the end of the corridor, a familiar face at every event, a stranger who seems to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Sometimes, a well-timed word of warning appears on your pillow. Avoid the West Salon after midnight. Or, the Italian ambassador's hat is not just a hat. You begin to sleep with one eye open and start locking the biscuit tin. Every so often, the emperor calls you aside, eager to share the latest intelligence. He relishes the intrigue, maps, coded telegrams, and mysterious aliases. You, however, wish he'd spend half as much energy on the draft in your dressing room, or the fact that the chef keeps burning the soufflé. Still, you adapt. You learn to guard your words, to watch the watchers, and to use the system for your own ends. You pass harmless news to distract the gossips, slip subtle instructions to loyal servants, and always keep your real thoughts tucked behind a polite smile. By the time you settle down for bed, you're exhausted from secrets, yours and everyone else's. But in the world of palace politics, paranoia isn't just survival, it's an art. And tomorrow, over tea, the game will begin again. With any luck, the only thing reported will be your impeccable taste in biscuits. Palace life, for all its ceremony and control, is full of surprises, most of them with fur, feathers, or the ability to hide under expensive furniture. The Empress's days are shared not only with ministers, courtiers, and the occasional suspicious journalist, but with a veritable menagerie of animals, each more unruly and eccentric than the last. It begins, innocently enough, with dogs. Every court must have poodles, and yours are legion. Small, elaborately groomed, and generally dressed better than some junior ambassadors. They swarm the hallways, trailing ribbons, making diplomatic introductions by sniffing anyone important. They bark when the post arrives, nap on your best chair, and demand elaborate birthday parties attended by a cross-section of the imperial household. Then there are the peacocks. Why peacocks? Nobody remembers. But at some point, it was decreed that the palace gardens would not be complete without a flock of jewel-bright birds to screech at dawn and strut through state receptions. The official explanation is decorative, but you suspect they're here to remind everyone that beauty can also be loud, aggressive, and somewhat judgmental. Their favorite activity is to unfurl their tails just as the visiting dignitaries round the corner, sending hats, monocles, and diplomatic composure flying. The aviary doesn't end there. Parrots squawk in the salons, canaries warble from the conservatory, and a particularly ancient cockatoo insists on mimicking the Chancellor's cough during meetings. Much to the Chancellor's horror, the birds are everywhere, perched on windowsills, perched on hats, occasionally perched on the accounting ledgers, adding their own commentary in the form of droppings and unsolicited political opinions. But the crown jewel of the menagerie is the hedgehog. No one is quite sure who brought him into the palace. He simply appeared one day, tucked inside a box of rare cheeses from Alsace. The hedgehog, now named Napoleon III, became a fixture overnight. He makes midnight excursions across the marble floors, terrifies the poodles, and once famously invaded the state dining room in the middle of a treaty negotiation. The resulting chaos, screaming guests, toppled platters, and a Bavarian countess taking refuge under the table earned him legendary status. A caricature soon appeared in the papers. Empress's secret weapon unleashed. The Empress's pet hour is a daily routine. Children, governesses, and the braver courtiers gather in the morning room to watch the poodles perform tricks, offer seed to the parrots, and try to coax the hedgehog out from beneath the chaise. There is a strict pecking order: poodles first, birds next, hedgehog last, and only if bribed with apple. Sometimes a turtle or two makes an unscheduled appearance, just to keep everyone on their toes. Of course, the staff is less enchanted. The housekeepers wage constant war against muddy paw prints, shed feathers, and the mysterious disappearance of silver spoons, the parrot's personal hoard, as it turns out. The imperial gardener has a permanent squint from chasing peacocks out of the rose beds. At least one footman has resigned over the porcupine incident, which to this day remains classified. For the Empress, though, the animals are a source of comic relief and rare honesty. The poodles never care about court intrigue. The birds are indifferent to scandal. The hedgehog treats everyone equally, meaning he ignores them all. In a world of ceremony, it's comforting to be surrounded by creatures who nap through speeches and have no interest in your royal title. And at the end of a long day, as the palace quiets and the animals settle into their respective corners, you smile, grateful for a menagerie that, for all its mischief, makes palace life feel, if not normal, at least a little more alive. Despite the endless parade of duties, ceremonies, and small talk, even an empress finds herself with the rarest of treasures: a free hour. How you use this window of time is a test of both creativity and survival instincts. In a world where being available means being dragged into emergency etiquette reviews or impromptu planning committees, distraction is not just an art, it's self-preservation. First, there are the hobbies. Every empress is expected to have refined interests, ideally ones that look good in portraits. Painting is always popular. You arrange a still life, set up an easel, and discover that while you may be Empress of France, you are not Empress of perspective. Still, everyone praises your modern approach, and the court decides your wobbly lemons are a subtle political metaphor. The emperor occasionally stops by, squints at your canvas, and then asks if that blue blob is the Duke of Parma. Music is another classic distraction. Sometimes you sit at the pianoforte, playing delicate waltzes. Other times you hammer out dramatic pieces with enough enthusiasm to make the poodles howl. Once, you took up the harp. It was quickly decided that the palace was not structurally sound enough for both the harp and the empress's nerves. Reading is your private joy. Your library, stocked with everything from Greek philosophers to scandalous English novels, is a sanctuary. You curl up with a book of poetry, only to be interrupted by a footman delivering urgent correspondence. You hide the poetry under a stack of state papers and feign deep concentration, No one needs to know you're engrossed in a detective story about a duchess with a mysterious past and a suspiciously clever goat. Of course, some hobbies are really just excuses to hide. The conservatory is a perfect refuge. Amid the ferns and orchids, you disappear behind a wall of greenery, safe from the prying eyes of courtiers and your mother-in-law's ongoing campaign to reorganize the silverware. The gardeners nod respectfully, complicit in your escape. Once, you spent a blissful half-hour pretending to inspect orchids while actually napping upright, which, in Empress circles, is practically a spa day. The true genius of royal distraction, though, is pretending to be busy. Nothing deters unwanted visitors quite like the sight of an empress in a flurry of important paperwork. You shuffle letters, rearrange ribbons, and draft mysterious memos to nobody. Occasionally, you stare pensively into the middle distance, as if meditating on the future of Europe, when in reality you're deciding whether to order lemon or raspberry tarts for tea. Crafts are useful too. Embroidery is endlessly recommended. You've spent years on a single handkerchief, which has become something of a palace legend. The longer you work on it, the less likely anyone is to assign you a new task. Needlework, after all, is serious business. Sometimes the emperor joins your distraction strategy. You read side by side in companionable silence, ignoring the stack of unsigned decrees. The parrot recites poetry, badly. The poodles nap, and for a few minutes the palace feels almost peaceful. In these rare, unscheduled moments, you are more than an empress. You are yourself. Free to be idle, creative, or simply bored. Because in a world where every second is claimed by someone else, mastering the art of distraction is your most essential royal skill. And when the next knock comes at your door, you'll be ready, with your embroidery, your half-finished painting, and the serene look of someone far too occupied to attend another meeting. So as you finally settle down for sleep, let's just take a breath together. Because you've made it through a day in the life of the Empress of France. And honestly, you deserve a medal. You've survived the palace politics, the hair-raising fashions, the diplomatic landmines disguised as dinner parties, and the impossible task of pretending everything is under control while half of Paris is peering in through the keyhole. If there's one lesson in all of this, it's that history is less about grand statues and marble busts, and more about regular people muddling through the weird, exhausting, and often hilarious details of everyday life. Whether you were sleeping under a ceiling fresco or dodging a rampaging imperial poodle, you were still just a human being trying to get through the day with your dignity and your ankles intact. Tonight, be gentle with yourself. Maybe smile at how absurd the past could be, and how much you have in common with people who wore too tight corsets and worried about their public image centuries before Instagram. Remember, you're not alone in your midnight overthinking, your awkward moments, or your desire for 5 quiet minutes and a snack that doesn't involve diplomatic consequences. So, as you drift off, wrapped in the quiet of your own room and the miracle of indoor plumbing, maybe send a little gratitude to those who came before you. People who kept going, even when the world demanded the impossible, the ridiculous, and the deeply impractical. Because history isn't just suffering and struggle, it's resilience, resourcefulness, and an unbreakable sense of humor that gets people through anything. Tonight, let your mind wander. Dream of silk sheets, secret gardens, and ballrooms where nobody minds if you dance badly. And as you fall asleep, remember, you already have everything a real empress ever wished for: peace, comfort, and the right to nap without an audience. Good night, and sweet, absurd dreams.